So I would request Dr. Malika Goel, who is the chief instructor for the next session, to please take over. Thank you so much, ma'am. Over to you.
Thank you.
वो लोग इसीलिए आते हैं
अगले सेशन में।
हाँ
I'm trying to 1 minute. Of my instructors, I think only Dr. Mudit Tyagi and Dr. Shobhit Chawla seem to be here. Dr. Verma and Dr. Atul Kumar are not here. Should we just give it another few minutes?
Yeah, sure.
Sure, ma'am. We can wait for.
Ideally, ma'am, the thing is we have to start on time because we are streaming live. So the audience would like to see some kind of discussion. What I would try and do is call them up right away and check if they are able to join in. And in the due course of time, they could be the next speakers. So my kind request would be to please get started, ma'am.
Okay.
Hello, ma'am. Welcome, ma'am. Hello, sir. Good evening to all.
Hello.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Lovely to see you all, sir. Hello, ma'am.
Hello.
So, ma'am, over to you, ma'am.
Okay. So this is a session on macular surgery, challenging situations and cases. It's purely video-based course. And these are my esteemed co-instructors. Professor Azad, who has some unforeseen problem now, so may not join. Professor Atul Kumar, who's probably in the ASRS session and will be joining soon. Dr. Lalit Verma, Dr. Shobhit Chawla, and Dr. Mudit Tyagi. And this is our program. We'll start with submacular hemorrhage that I will be speaking on, and then refractory macular holes with Dr. Mudit Tyagi, epimacular membranes with Dr. Lalit Verma, disc pit maculopathy with Dr. Shobhit Chawla, the latest in equipment and technologies by Professor Atul Kumar, and then again myopic traction maculopathy and foveus cases by Dr. Shobhit Chawla. So since Dr. Azad is not there, I will start the session with my talk.
Malika, ma'am, sorry, I would just like to ask you one thing. So the timing, should we put the timers at as per the program book, 7 minutes per talk? That's specified.
I think you can make it 8 minutes.
8 minutes.
One buzzer at 8 and the next one at 9, because one talk is already not there. So we have some time. Okay. So 8 minutes, and then at the 9th minute is the second buzzer.
And ma'am, there are 26 minutes for panel discussion as well. So whatever you say.
Yeah, I know that. That's why I said we can extend a bit, and that should be
7
fine.
and-
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
8 and 9.
Right.
Okay.
अपने टॉक के बाद जा रहे हैं यार.
Okay, Dr. Atul has joined. All right.
Malika.
Yes, sir. Good evening, sir.
Yeah.
So I'll be speaking about different situations in submacular hemorrhage. So one situation is, as we see on the left side, where most of the hemorrhage is at the macular center. And here we can do the procedures which will displace the heme from the center to improve the vision. The second situation is where most of the hemorrhage is paracentral, and by displacing the heme, we might actually make the situation worse by rolling the blood into the macular center. So here the only solution is to remove the blood and not displace it. Now, when most of the blood is at the macular center, we have two options. One is to do a gas displacement with or without injection of intravitreal TPA. Now, this is usually works only within the first 3 to 5 days of the bleed when it is still not organized. When it is more than 5 days old, or when there is a significant amount of hemorrhage, then it's better to go with vitrectomy and inject submacular TPA with or without an anti-VEGF as indicated based on the disease and air. When most of the heme is not at the macular center, but the amount of blood is only very little, you can get away with an anti-VEGF injection only, which helps to clear the blood also. Whereas when the amount of heme, which is paracentral, is moderate to large, then you need to remove the blood with a vitrectomy. And in all cases, when we are trying to remove the blood, it's better to do a pre-procedure B scan, because there can be a significant post-procedure vitreous hemorrhage, a breakthrough hemorrhage, and we may not be able to have comparative OCTs or fundus photographs. So then the only method to compare would be, or monitor the course would be B scan. So it's always better to do a pre-operative B scan even with clear media. So just a few examples of these situations. When we see this kind of case in the OPD with a AMD, most of the time just a gas injection along with an anti-VEGF, if that is due in the course of the disease, suffices. And on day one, we can see that significant clearing and most of the blood has gone inferiorly. Now, the few tips with this is that when we inject gas, better to do a paracentesis to reduce the volume. And the injection can be done with the finest needle available, preferably 29 or 30 gauge. And use the inferotemporal pars plana to inject rather than the superior, so that when the patient sits up, we do not lose the gas injection through the needle track. That happens often. There is no gas bubble on day one if the injection has been given from the superotemporal pars plana. After the injection, immediately after the injection, somebody has to mute their window. Yeah. Immediately after the injection, the head should be turned towards the injected side so that the gas bubble moves to the nasal side of the vitreous cavity and does not escape through the needle track. For a few minutes, the head should be turned to the injected side on the operation table itself. And following that, when the patient is in the recovery prone position, and the patient should be seen the next day for any complications like raised IOP and CRAO, etc. Now, this is a patient with Terzan syndrome. Terzan syndrome with bilateral submacular hemorrhage as well as pre-retinal hemorrhage in the right eye. And she had subarachnoid hemorrhage, which was making her very uncooperative. So this was bilateral. We decided to take her for both eyes injection, gas and TPA at the same time. But on the table, she was very uncooperative. So we could give only in the right eye with TPA and gas. And you see, she had a marked improvement from CF to 6/18 vision very rapidly. So seeing her improvement in the right eye, I took her up for the left eye after 5 days. But by that, and the left eye was the better eye. But when I took her up after 5 days, there was already an organizing heme. And you can see that ultimately this eye recovered much less vision, 636 only, though it started off with the better vision and the better situation in every way. Just to say that the tissue plasminogen activator, when it comes with its diluent and you mix it with that, you get a concentration which you don't need to dilute any further. Without any further changes in that, we can just draw 0.05 ml and that gives you the dose which is required for intravitreal injection. So based on this case, what we saw is that the timing of the injection is very important, a delay of 5 days and we lost some vision, as well as probably we did not give TPA in the left eye and that also altered the result. We tried to save the costs because we had already used it for the right eye. But nowadays cost is not an issue because a 25 milligram vial is available, which is only about 15,000 rupees. Earlier, it was about 50,000 to 75,000 rupees. Now, for a submacular hemorrhage at the center, which has not responded to gas injection, you can see after the gas, there is still a large hemorrhage on the right side. And though some of the hemorrhage, if you see, has gone down also, it has been displaced. There's a large collection. So this is a 40 gauge needle with injection of TPA into the subretinal space. With an IOCT, of course, it would be easy to see if there is an RP detachment you're going into, or if where is the clot highest. And then after the injection of the subretinal TPA, just a fluid air exchange, no endolaser required for this retinotomy. So the injection should be at the thickest part of the blood and care not to enter the sub-RP space. And you can see that it improves quite significantly, but ultimately it is the disease which determines the prognosis. Now, this is a very interesting patient who already had poor vision in one eye. And when he came to me earlier, he was left eye was the 6/6, but suddenly he came with a sudden drop in vision with CF-CF. I just gave ranibizumab and did not give gas because if you see, there is a small area in the center which is still preserved. And my worry was that with the gas and prone position, we might even lose that. And fortunately, I took that decision because after a month of ranibizumab, vision had improved from CF-CF to 6/36. He was very happy. So then I gave an aflibercept. We still didn't know what's the cause. We did an angio. There was no new vessels that I could make out. But anyway, we gave an aflibercept. And you can see again after a month, excellent vision recovery, 6/18. FFA was unremarkable at this point. And we have, after that, we have not seen him again. 3 injections and vision is very good. This is a lady, as said, paracentral macroaneurysm which has bled. Now here, the foveal heme is very minimal, though the vision is only CF-CF. So by doing a regular TPA injection and prone position would cause a worsening of the situation. So we lasered the macroaneurysm first and then made a larger gauge retinotomy, not the 40 gauge, with a 23 gauge cannula and put in TPA there. As I'm injecting TPA, you can see the blood is coming out because of the positive pressure. And then there's a contact time of 10 minutes. And now I tried to aspirate with active suction the blood, but you see it's not coming out easily despite the TPA. So I did a positive pressure instead with the reflux of the foot switch, because I had realized when I was injecting TPA, the blood was coming out very easily. So I used the reflux rather than the aspiration, alternate reflux and aspiration to get the blood out. So initial reflux and then aspirating this. So in this way, over several minutes. And finally, we took out the clots, the remaining clots with active suction. Followed by air exchange and oil, endolaser for this large retinotomy and oil. And you can see this is at 1 week and this is at 6 months with very good vision, 6/6, which was CF-CF earlier. Thank you very much. We can have some discussion here.
Yeah, I would like to focus on one point which I use for decision making. I do surgery in a fair number of cases of polypoidal choroidal vasculopathy with large bleeds. So if the bleed is more than 1,000 micron height at the fovea, I take the decision to do surgery. I don't go in for displacement because I feel surgery is a very safe, controlled way and we are able to do a good job. Many times these hemorrhages are huge and extend till the equator. But if the blood at the fovea is less, I go in for a strong anti-VEGF like aflibercept therapy and then see how the patient does. Any views, Dr. Atul?
Yes, the blood is more, it's a thick and it's extending till the arcades. I prefer doing a submacular TPA. I have my cocktail with Avastin and air. So that displaces very quickly downwards. Because blood, yeah, I use a 41 gauge translocation needle because that's self-sealing. So recently, 3-4 days back, I did one, so the blood displays downwards. Even if it goes beyond the arcades, the visual acuity improves. You've got to remember that these cases, you know, once they've got PCV, they tend to re-bleed in 25% eyes. So you got to redo your ICG a month later and also do the OCTA. Because I give a lot of importance to OCTA and OCT and I re-inject if required.
Sir, but if you see a patient coming within a day of the bleeding, it happened today or yesterday.
Yes.
Would you still not give a trial to gas? Because
Of
it
course
works
I
well.
would.
Yeah, because
I agree with you. It's within a day, Malika, I would like to use the gas
Even massive hemorrhages can resolve very well. I mean,
Yes,
they go
they
to the
can, because they're
periphery.
very liquid, still,
Yeah.
in a liquid state. So if you got a very fresh hemorrhage, you may inject a gas and position him. So
But
how
then
do you
if you're
position?
doing gas, you have to combine it with a good anti-VGF also to treat the primary pathology.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, of course. How do you position the patient is the regular full prone position, especially with a pneumopexy, it's very important. If you've done a vitrectomy, maybe you don't need a prone position, but without a vitrectomy, it's important to do a good prone position.
For your prone position initially, followed by propped up. But in vitrectomized eyes, you can just give them propped up.
Yeah, because there is so much gas volume there. Here, the gas bubble is small, so you need it positioned right at the macula.
Macula, yeah, because it squeezes out the blood from the macula.
Yeah.
So can I just ask one question to Dr. Shobhit, sir? This is, sir, because of the fact that you have got such an extensive experience with polypoidal cases, before injecting TPA, do you think that we should check for the coagulation profile of these patients? Some of these patients might be on clopidogrel or other agents.
I always take an extensive history of use of anticoagulants.
Yeah.
The patient is on anticoagulants, then of course it has to be stopped if you're planning to do a surgery. But you have to be prepared for repeated surgeries in these patients if the bleed is massive, because once you've done TPA on the first day, many times you have to follow it up by a lavage a week or 10 days later.
Any preference for a agent of tamponade in these cases? You prefer gas, which one, or air?
I prefer just sulfur hexafluoride.
Okay.
Any other?
I by and large use C3F8, sulfur hexafluoride. Somehow, I think because long tamponade may be required, especially in chronic kind of, after you have done a vitrectomy, injected subretinal TPA, and then gas. So by and large, I want extended tamponade. And post-op also, patients who have been given subretinal TPA, sometimes I do supplement later on after a couple of weeks, intravitreal injection of Eylea again.
You mean extended tamponade by about a lesser percentage of C3F8?
No, gas pill. Yeah, gas, the percentage is around 10 to 12%.
That's good.
Yeah. And you see, recently we injected in one doctor only, 2-3 times Eylea may be required, because most of these diagnosis is IPCV only, and we do not have access to PDT nowadays. So we are dependent on monotherapy in all these patients. So all this technique of surgery, what we do, we don't kill the disease per se. It's only the manifestations of the hemorrhage we are displacing or evacuating or liquefying. So ultimately, you have to kill the disease, and which is done either by PDT or by multiple injections of aflibercept.
Yes, the injections continue as it is. We are only displacing the blood, that's all.
Yeah.
Blood is very toxic to the macula.
Yes.
Malika, that causes shearing of the photoreceptors. Like the nutrition to the retina gets affected. Is a emergency surgery required? You have to urgently do it, because the amount of damage to the photoreceptors is unimaginable.
That's what I saw in that case with bilateral submacular hemorrhage from Terzan syndrome. When we delayed the second eye, we had a very poor visual result. The eye with a massive actually hemorrhage did much better because we treated the same day. So time is very important.
A lot of these patients, Atul, come pretty late. You see, how do you approach once you are counseling a patient? We may not be lucky that we get patient within a few days. By and large, they come pretty late, and then prognosis becomes difficult, as you are rightly saying, that because of it's one of the medical ophthalmic urgencies where we have to intervene within a day or so. Otherwise, the fibrin and the shearing of photoreceptors may occur. So how do you prognosticate? Because patient is keen to know how much vision he will have.
But tell them that it's a very, very guarded outcome, and within a month of the bleed, I generally take them up, and I tell them that the option, if they don't get it done, is no vision at all. They'll have a central scotoma, large scotoma. They'll only have peripheral vision. But if we take a chance, there is a maybe 50% chance we may get some better vision than what he or she has. So I like to give them a chance. If they agree, it's fine. If they don't agree, I let it be.
Yeah,
Follow
I
up.
think we can't prognosticate, sir, in these cases. These are cases where we just have to take a chance.
Yeah,
Because
Exactly.
there are times when after injecting TPA 1 month later, you will find that the entire blood has got away. You've got a totally flat macula. But there is such an extensive RP atrophy and photoreceptor damage
No,
that
I
the vision
agree.
will not be. Yeah.
Problem
So-
is, if you tell them guarded, very guarded, they will go
Yeah.
around, do window shopping here and there, keep going around, and somebody will say only injection may be required. So once they come back, then you are.
It is still worse. Yeah, you are. Yeah.
That is.
And sometimes you're so lucky that you find a lovely fovea once you remove the associated vitreous hemorrhage and done the surgery for the many times you don't require to go in for the submacular blood after clearing these PCV hemorrhages, just the vitreous hemorrhage. Because fovea is spared. You just give an anti-VGF and come out after NSG.
Correct.
Okay, shall we go to the next talk then?
Yeah.
With Dr. Mudit Tyagi on refractory macular holes.
All right. So, good evening, everyone. Are my slides visible?
Yes.
So first of all, let me thank Dr. Malika Goyal and AIOS for this IC. And so I will be speaking about refractory macular holes and what can we do in some of these cases. Now, if we look at it, there are essentially two types of macular hole closures which have been described. Type 1, which is flat or closed. Type 2, which is flat but open. And sometimes you can have these persistent macular holes even after a surgery. So what can we do for them? Now, there are a lot of options available. If we go through literature, if we go through what has been done, practically so many things have been tried. Inverted ILM flaps, free flaps, autologous. People have tried lens capsular flaps, retinal flaps, perifoveal radial incisions, arcuate retinotomy. So multiple attempts, multiple techniques have been tried. But the two most common ones which are more commonly in use are number one, either an autologous ILM flap or something which has now become very common, which is a retinal flap, and we'll come to both of them. Inverted ILM flap, I'll not deal about it. It's already been discussed so many times about what inverted ILM flap does, but we are discussing right now about autologous ILM flaps. And let me just show you what happens over here. The problem with autologous ILM is that even if you have harvested it from another place, this is something which you have to be careful. And I wanted to show this video. This was actually initially attempted by one of my fellows, and then I had to go and intervene. But these are the problems which happen if you do not position your ILM. Even after you have used it or harvested it, it tends to float away. And once it goes away, it becomes difficult to catch hold of it and put it. Either you lose the flap or then you will have to reharvest it. So this is the problem which my fellow was initially facing, where the flap just got totally lost. And then later on, we were able to catch hold of a flap, bring it back. There are people who have tried using PFCL. Under PFCL, they've tried it, but I have somehow always felt that under PFCL, there is always a small risk of a small bubble getting entrapped over there. And most of the times I've been able to manage without PFCL. So after you have trapped your flap over here, you can just bring it, gently guide it over here and place it. So this was initial struggles which somebody was facing. But once you have it over here in place, you can just safely tuck it in. And after you have tucked it in, you have to be very careful. You can't be pressing so hard. This is another video of another of my colleagues. I got it through one of my colleagues, Hitesh Agarwal. This was his attempt where he tried to harvest multiple flaps. Initially, again, it got displaced. So the problem with these flaps is sometimes these can get displaced and you have to be careful about them. Once you have harvested them, place them gently and you will be able to achieve success. I will just come to... So the problem, like I said over here, was displacement of flap. And what you can do is, number one, you can take a slightly larger flap and then you can tuck it over there. Sometimes people have also attempted putting a coat of viscoelastic over there. What we have sometimes done is use an autologous serum to stabilize the flap over there. But even if you don't have access to viscoelastic or autologous serum, you can still just safely take a flap or a part of ILM and put it over here in these cases. If the ILM free flap does not succeed, then the other technique which we have resorted to is what we call an autologous neurosensory retinal graft. This was a technique which was described initially by Dr. Dilraj Grewal and Dr. Tamer Mahmood in 2016, which they have tried extensively for refractory myopic macular holes initially, and now it's been commonly used even for other refractory holes. And this is one of our patients whom we had seen who had already undergone a surgery elsewhere before they came to us, and the hole was open. And this is how the surgery, so this is the surgery over here. We just completed the vitrectomy. Some residual vitreous was there. We removed it. And after that, we basically, first of all, marked the area from where we were harvesting the flap with the laser marks. Again, the point over here to remember is that you should take a larger size, and usually around 30% more than what you initially attempt for the whole size. After doing a dithermy, you can safely use a scissor to harvest this. One point to remember is kindly do not do extensive cauterization, because if you do, then the edges of the margin of the flap become a bit necrotic. So after you have taken a flap, again, there are people who describe using PFCL and gliding it under PFCL, but most of the times I have been able to manage even without the help of PFCL. What you can just safely do is there was small blood clot over here, which we just removed. And subsequently, we had injected autologous serum over here in this case, in the hope that we wanted to try whether it will help in a better improvement of the functions over there. But even if you don't have, you can just safely go ahead and place it over there. You just take your graft and you can just place it and tuck it over here. In these cases, usually I do end up putting oil inside the eye, and subsequently your graft is safely ensconced inside. And this is how the first post-operative day photograph was, and you can see over here on the OCT that the graft is nicely in place. What happens subsequently, though, in all of these cases, and now we've got a more than 2-year follow-up of some of our patients, is that the edges of the graft do tend to regress a little bit, and then you see over a period of time an area of the hole which is devoid of the cover of the graft. But the visual acuity in most of these cases does tend to improve. So this is the patient post-operatively later on, and this is another patient with a large macular hole. And this is the first post-operative day visit where you can see this graft well placed inside the macular hole. And this is subsequently, and the visual acuity also improves in most of these cases. This is later on at a 1 to 3 month follow-up. Again, the graft was in place. The point is that you can use a soft tip cannula or a forceps or even a scissor to separate it. PFCL can be used to ease the transportation of the retinal graft under the PFCL. You can glide it over there. And the most important step is a slow fluid air exchange to avoid displacement of the graft. One small tip is that if you are doing a fluid air exchange with the help of a cutter, you can ensure that the tip of the cutter or the opening is away from the graft side. So your opening of the cutter is nasally, and that will help in preventing with vacuum or a tug over there at the graft, so that the graft displacement is reduced. So that is something which you can do to ensure that the graft stays in place. Arcuate retinotomies have been tried in radial incisions. I actually have no personal experience with radial incisions or arcuate retinotomies. My preferred technique for all of these is the retinal free flap for most of my macular holes. So with that, I would probably conclude. Like I said, there have been other modifications where people have used autologous heparinized blood also in autologous serum. But what has worked best for us in most of these macular refractory cases are the use of the retinal free flap. So with that, I would say that these are techniques which do end up having a good anatomical result. Though to be honest, the long-term functional outcomes still need to be analyzed. Like I said, we have 2-year outcomes of most of our graft patients, and we have seen that at the end of 2 years, the graft does tend to regress and reduce in size. I actually even discussed with Dr. Dilraj Grewal as to what has his experience been in his cases, and even they agree that over a period of time, the graft does tend to shrink. But they say after a period of 6 months or a year, the shrinkage stops and it becomes kind of stable at that point of time. So long-term outcomes though are still awaited, but this is a promising technique and works well in macular holes, refractory ones. Mind you, I would not suggest that you go and attempt it for your idiopathic macular holes, but cases which have already undergone a surgery, it's a promising technique which is being now commonly done by a lot of retinal surgeons for these macular cases, refractory cases. Thank you.
Yeah, excellent. Dr. Lalit Verma also has experience with this. Are you there, Dr. Verma? Yeah.
Yeah,
Would you
yeah.
like to say something?
Nice videos, Mudit, as usual. My experience is that without PFCL, you don't succeed, because otherwise, I have not large experience, but a couple of patients of this failed macular surgery. So for gliding the flap and positioning it, initial, PFCL is required. That fear of going under the retina is, fortunately, it hasn't happened with me. and I do not inject a large amount of PFCL. It's only within the arcade only, and then once the flap is there, and most of the times there is some capillary suction there. You don't have to tug it. I am against putting anything inside the hole. I just position it and gently with the help of back of this thing, just touch it, and then you are right. Then fluidics has to be down. That means the air pressure has to come down, and always on the nasal side of the disc, do a slow. And couple of times I have injected the visco also, as described by the Chennai group, the one, and that also has helped. So without PFCL, I'm not very comfortable.
Yeah, I actually discussed it with quite a few people. But fortunately till now I've been able to manage it. But
Right.
I do accept that it is difficult.
Yeah.
It is actually a bit tricky. Twice I have had this position where my graph got displaced. I had to again ease it back into place. So that probably will not happen if you use PFCL. But I have till now tried to avoid PFCL. I've been able to get away without it. But you are right. I think PFCL use does make our life a little bit more easier when we are doing this.
See, the problem is there are 10 people watching you.
Yeah,
and
I
and
know.
you're struggling here, there. Best if PFCL is a cool, it makes your life very cool, and you
Yeah.
easily come out of it.
Not only that, if the
some people
graft,
tried,
sorry.
Yeah, some people have tried amniotic membrane graft also.
Yeah. One of my colleagues, Dr. Samira Nayak, actually has been trying using amniotic membrane for refractory macular holes. She has good results, but just her unpublished anecdotal data is what she has.
I agree from practical viewpoint, it is the autologous graft or the retinal graft, or at best AMG. I have not tried, but
Yeah.
apart from this, nothing else works.
The graft can also go upside down, and you might actually end up putting the inner side on the
True.
back side. So I think it's very important. You said the graft gets displaced sometimes. So when you bring it back, you don't even know which side is up.
Which side is up?
So I think that's why also PFCL will at least prevent that displacement.
Yeah.
And also, I guess the PFCL reduces the amount of bleeding that you might get from the site of the harvesting, from the pressure itself, the hemostasis. I think hemostasis is extremely important. Do you have an experience of heavy bleeding when you're harvesting?
No, but then again, I do a laser first, then I do a cauterization, and then I start using with the scissor. There will, in some cases, be a mild bleeding because you've already cauterized it, but till now, no case where there was a massive bleeding.
Have you ever considered raising a small bleb there?
It's an interesting idea, sir. In fact, I think Dr. Claes or somebody in URETNA had shown, yes. Yeah, but I have not tried it, but that's what they had shown. In his series, he had raised a bleb with a 41 gauge needle. He had just raised a bleb in all quadrants. And that he said releases the traction and the pull over there and it leads to closure. But I have not tried it till now. Among you have, sir?
No, I have only tried amniotic membrane, and I have tried free ILM flaps along with autologous serum.
Yeah.
I would like to ask you, have you ever left any of these eyes with gas? Any of these?
The autologous ILM flap ones I have left, but the RP, no, not the retinal graft ones. For them, I've always put oil.
You have also described tissue glue for the peripheral breaks, Mudit.
Yeah.
So have you tried using that to close the macular hole, which is easily available?
I did try it, but the problem that happened was, to be honest, I did it in 6 cases. 3 of them closed, 3 of them did not close. And the results were very variable. I mean, I know that fibrin glue is non-toxic. It is shown that it's non-toxic. And the hypothesis was, once you have removed the ILM and you put a clot over there, once the clot contracts, it should be enough to probably pull the layers of retina towards each other. But I believe that the contractile force of the fibrin plug is probably not that sufficient to close the hole. That's why I did try it in 6 cases. We had a pilot study. I got an approval from our IRB and we did it over here, but the results were not promising.
Sir, Dr. Atul, do you have any experience with tissue glue for macular hole?
No, I don't use that. I like to use the ILM auto transplantation. Works well.
And Mudit, the 2 points which you mentioned to prevent displacement of the graft would also, one is that the vitrectomy cutter should be away from the graft side, should be nasal.
Yeah.
That also holds true for ILM flaps, actually.
Yeah, for both of them.
Yeah, and even the sizing of the ILM flap also has to be done carefully when we are trying to create a flap to invert.
Yeah.
Many times, if you're not thinking, it is smaller than the hole, and then you're in a problem. So even ILM flap has to be sized properly.
Yeah, it has to be a bit larger than the hole. Ideally, rule of thumb is somewhere around 30% large is what people say. But you
Yes.
can't measure 30% obviously.
Okay,
but
but at least
yeah, but at least yeah, it should be large than the hole.
Any comments, Dr. Atul Kumar? Sir, any comments?
Malika, I just like to use ILM auto transplantation. Today I had two refractory holes in my surgery, morning surgery. So both cases I stained with ILM blue, and I sometimes use the dark fluid, dark ILM blue, or sometimes I use the BBG, and both are the same dye. And so stain them well, and then I use perfluorocarbon liquid, put it over the hole, and then I bring the ILM flaps close slowly under the PFCL and bring it over. So I use multiple flaps and to make sure, and then I gradually do a slower fluid exchange. As the PFCL gets aspirated, the gas takes over.
Yeah,
It works well.
good. So shall we move to the next talk then? Dr.
Yeah.
Lalit Verma for
Yeah.
epiretinal membranes. Epiretinal membranes.
हमारा टेक्निक तो बेस्ट है yeah.
So thank you, Malika, for having me here in this surgical course. And out of all the conditions, epiretinal membrane is relatively a easier job, considering the talk which you presented, submacular and refractory macular hole. Comparatively, it is comparatively. So all of us know about this latest classification, IVTS classification, which I will not go through. So we remember these three membranes which are there. One is the hyaloid, one is the epiretinal, one is the ILM. So all of us are fond of removing any kind of membranes, whether required or not. We tend to remove all the membranes. And we can easily differentiate on OCT because of the refractile properties of ERM throws a reddish or a stronger signal. So I'll just show one video which has a couple of conditions. So this is a bent MVR blade. So important is to identify the edge. Here the hyaloid has already been taken out. So identify the edge of the membrane. So once the edge is visible and you are in the right kind of plane, safe plane, then I think it becomes very easy to either do it with the needle only or take a forceps and peel it very gently. Your eye should always be on the retina once you are pulling with the help of a forceps, because you should not cause any iatrogenic break or bleeding, because some of them may be adherent or may not come out so easily. So in this patient, it was not much adherent and the underlying macula was pretty healthy. So it came out pretty easily. So this was one patient where this was a diabetic membrane. So here I didn't stain, and this because its edge was visible, so I just took it from the temporal side and brought it towards the nasal side, and this came away pretty easily. And this is another diabetic patient where there are a lot of epiretinal membranes there. The diabetic membranes always behave differently than the idiopathic membranes which we see. Here there are multiple attachments, most of them are vascular, so you have to be very, very careful. So a lot of times nowadays we can get away with these cutters only, small gauge cutters. All these membranes can be shaved away, and even this blood can be taken out in these patients. So very easily then you can keep them with the cutter. And then laser all these diabetics. This is the same patient where membrane was removed all across the macula. This is a silicon-filled eye, highly myopic eye, and this was the only eye. So there had a post-operative proliferation. So we did this membrane removal under the oil only. Sometimes I'll go after oil removal, sometimes under the oil if the edge is visible. So here, with the help of this Ackard forceps, gently grasp it, very careful because very close to the macula. And if it comes very easily, I will do it without the oil removal. If there's some difficulty, then I'll remove the oil and take out this membrane. So this was another patient. He had a big epiretinal membrane and also a dry ARMD. So my technique in such removal is that after we remove the hyaloid, I do an air fluid exchange and try to make it dry posterior pole. And once it is dry, with the help of this backlash needle, green tip, and I will inject 1 or 2 drops of this trypan blue or reti blue. Actually, not trypan blue, reti blue, and wait for a couple of minutes, and then under air itself, I will aspirate out the excess of this before starting the infusion cannula. And once this is out, then you start the fluid. Take this 25 gauge MVR blade and tease away, identify the plane and try to tease this membrane. And once you see the edge, then take this forceps, and generally most of these membranes will come in one single sheet, and the sheet is generally bigger than what is initially visible. And go to the base after you have taken part of it, then again leave it, go again to the base, and then peel the entire membrane for it to come in a single sheet. So this was another patient where same technique, 1 drop of this reti blue dye, and then again MVR blade. Here the membrane was beyond the posterior pole also, beyond the arcades, relatively more densely adherent, but you have to be patient because identifying edge is very, very important. And then tease away very slowly, gradually, and this was strongly adherent. At this time, you do get palpitations once it should not, because iatrogenically tear away the tissue or the vessel, because you can have some bleeding there. Fortunately, it was a huge, extensive membrane going all across. So fortunately, it came out pretty easily. This was a patient who had a RD also, a secondary reg RD, because this patient had some vasculitis prior to that. Again, stained with a similar technique of reti blue, identify this edge, and once the edge comes out, then it becomes a relatively easier job, provided you keep your eyes on the retina and don't blink too much at this time, because it may cause an issue. Yeah. So then I trimmed this membrane because this cord-like structure could not come out completely. The ERM ultimately I had to trim. This was another patient who had so we used this tricot to peel away the hyaloid, and then after this is done, airflow exchange, then reti blue, then 25 gauge MVR blade. The difference here was that this membrane was very, very sticky, and I did not have the courage to pull. So what I did, I took the help of a cutter here. So I tried to make a cauliflower like from all across, make a multi-layered kind of stuff, going temporal, then nasal. Then, because if you see the underlying retina, as soon as you take the forceps and pull, it seems that is also getting elevated and becoming white tissue. Notice that reflects here on the undersurface. So go very slow, go to the periphery, try to tease away all the edges, because it was not coming so easily. You see this retina here getting pulled up. So then came back to the superior part, and sorry. And once most of it was done like this, so I took the cutter. Then maybe whether it's required or not, but it made the job slightly atraumatic. So these were a couple of patients. This was one patient more where, again, you see this 3-in-1 kind of surgery, as I had shown before also. You take tricot, peel off the hyaloid, signet ring formation. In this patient, we had done the cataract surgery because a lot of these macular membranes, we take out the cataract in the same sitting. 1 drop, couple of drops of reti blue here, remove excess. Here again, the membrane is very densely adherent, and there was the appearance of a lamellar kind of macular hole here. So after this irregular kind of brittle membrane was removed, the surface of the retina was not as smooth I would have liked it to be. One last couple of seconds only.
So take your time, we have time.
Yeah. So therefore, after this, I injected BBG. So tricot followed by reti blue, then BBG, then this ILM removed I remove this ILM also and try to create a flap for all across. So sometimes you will peel, sometimes you will create a flap depending on the size of the hole. So fortunately, this came out very nicely. Sometimes once you are removing this ILM, you will notice that ERM removal itself has, removed the ILM partly. So this was the visual results of this patient where we did cataract plus all the 3 removals. And fortunately for me, after a couple of months, improved from 624 to 6/6. Meaning thereby removal of these epithelial membranes generally have a good visual prognosis, although the contour may take months or sometimes, close to a year to come back to normal. So combined cataract surgery plus macular surgery in these patients tends to give the best kind of results. So remember, we can't do without Tricort, Retivlu, and BBG dye. ILM peel, sometimes I will not insist also in pure ERMs. If the surface of retina is pretty smooth, I will try to remove ILM, but I will not persist at the cost of damage to the underlying retina. And even global trends say that peeling in ERM surgery is not advantageous. Thank you very much for your kind attention. Thank you for the opportunity.
Excellent videos, a wide variety of situations. Very good, sir. So pleasure to see these. What would the BBG dye not stain the membranes as well as the Retivlu, which you have been talking about?
Yeah. I don't think so. BBG, you see, will have a negative kind of staining. Then sometimes what we do, utilize that property of BBG only and try to catch the ILM stain from the slightly distance from the macula, and then both the membranes can come.
So does everybody use Retivlu only for the membranes? Everybody here?
A lot of people in my hospital also do not use Retivlu. They will just stain with BBG,
BBG, okay.
take the ILM along with the ERM and take it up. Negative staining property of BBG.
Okay.
In fact, for heavily puckered membrane, I many times just start with an ILM peel and let the membrane ERM come off with the ILM.
I agree. Sometimes we do that also, but this for me is very, very comfortable.
Yeah, and do you, after you are satisfied with your peeling, do you restain, double stain, even triple or quadruple stain till you are sure that everything has been removed? Because sometimes we are very happy after removing the thick membrane, and even we think that ILM has been removed. But to my surprise, I find that when I put in the BBG, again, there is a lot of tissue there. And so there are sometimes many layers to the things that we are removing.
Absolutely. So you're right, absolutely, Malika. So what I said was, after ERM removal, I will put BBG dye, and if the ILM, there's an intense staining of ILM, I'll definitely remove the ILM. If not, then I may not insist on if the surface is pretty smooth and not wrinkled, I will not do. Because I will definitely try. You see, with the direct pinch and peel technique, if it comes out well and good. But if it does not, but most of the times, you see, you are right. During the process of ERM removal, you have caused sufficient pull force that this ILM has come out, if not completely, but patchy.
But always better to stain before closing the case.
Before leaving it, before closing the ports, you should.
Because there are often a lot of surprises.
ILM removal has advantages because it will, in the future post-operative period, it minimizes the recurrence of ERM also, and it gives you surety that you removed all the membranes.
And when we have the sheet of the ERM in hand and are peeling off, sometimes, if there is a break in attention, we might just tear the ERM and close to the macular center. And the problem is now if you have to regrasp, you might have to go close to the center and regrasp the edge. So while peeling over the center, it's better to take as wide a sweep over the macula so that you don't end up breaking it anywhere near the center. And your second maneuver doesn't have to be picking up the edge nearer the center.
Agreed. Absolutely agree.
So loss of attention during surgery is
blinking.
Yeah.
As soon as you are there, your blink rate reduces, heart rate increases.
Yeah.
This does happen because you are accountable.
Yeah. Any other comments? Otherwise, we can move to the next talk.
Yeah, so in these cases, again, if you have lost the edge of the ERM, like what you were saying, again, in these cases, the ILM removal becomes very handy.
Yes.
Sometimes,
absolutely.
yes. So
Absolutely.
then with the help of ILM,
Very nice point you made. If you have lost the edge, then go ahead and inject BBG. So and like Shobit was saying, then along with the ILM, this ERM will come.
yeah.
Very nice point.
So should we go to the next talk then? Dr. Atul Kumar, you have anything to say, sir?
Actually, I do the ILM, the brilliant blue dye right in the beginning, and I get a negative stain over the ERM. And I somehow feel the ILM peeling is not necessary in every case of ERM removal, because see, there's a lot of damage to the underlying nerve fiber layer. We create downfill, and if I get a good ERM peel, I may not even do the ILM peeling.
Yeah.
It's not necessary, because there's a lot of damage to the underlying. ILM peeling is not an essential component.
Agreed.
There is a very long series, what Dr. Atul is saying, by Dr. Praveen Duggal's group. It's quite a old series, about 10, 12 years back. And they have done histopathological studies showing foot plates of Mueller cells and all coming in they've compared the visual recoveries also in all the patients, about 1,000 cases collected over quite a few centers. It's a multi-centric study, and which also says one should not be very aggressive about the ILM.
Okay, Dr. Chawla, now looking at because of our discussion, I think we have taken a lot of time. Should we have your two talks together at the end after Dr. Atul's talk? Is it okay with you?
Whatever you want, I have no problem.
Sir, are you ready with your talk?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Okay, so we can have yours, then Dr. Shobit can take both the talks in one go. So Dr. Atul Kumar will be speaking on newer techniques and instrumentation.
Yes, Malika, thank you. Thank you for inviting me to be a part of your instruction course. And I'll be talking on the latest in equipment, instrumentation, and techniques. In the short time, I can't possibly cover so many things, but I'll talk about certain important aspects of macular surgery. And it's important that a newcomer is trained on a simulator, because just like phaco, you can also train yourself for retina and membrane peeling, ERM removal, just like it's a virtual training. And so IC by VR Magic is the one which we use at RP Center for our residents to train. And it's important that whenever you buy because equipment and instrumentation, you've got to invest, and you should try to get a machine which has linear suction cutting or a dual dynamic drive cutting. It should have good illumination, like the xenon I have no financial interest in the Constellation or the LED light source in the DOR Kiva. And you should have a VFI and a VFE facility. You force the infusion like oil inside VFI, and you can remove the oil with the automated injector and extractor. The facility has to be there, because often oil may be injected. A duty cycle control is very important, because at high cut rates, the port may close. So you have open bias, closed bias duty cycle. 50-50 open bias, closed bias. So cutter port still stays open despite high cut rates. Flow and suction control should be there in all the machines, so that the eyeball doesn't collapse, and the sensors built in also. And the vented gas force infusion is like, if you got like BSS plus or whatever fluid you're using for the eye for the infusion, there should be air pressure available over the fluid which is there in the bottle, over the upside down bottle which is putting a fluid in. Like I use BSS plus, so the vented GFI gives you pressure. Suddenly you can, with just the tap of a foot switch, because both your limbs are being used for cutting as well as for the microscope. So the cutting side, the vitrectomy pedal side, you can tap one side and you can increase the pressure to 60. That's very important, because sometimes bleeders are there in diabetics and all. So you can do it for some time, but not too long, few seconds, maybe a minute or so. But you get an audio signal. The audio signal helps to tell you that 1 minute is up, and so it guides you that you better bring it back. It doesn't say exactly that you bring it back, but you know that you're going to bring it back. So I don't like to keep it at high, but it's just enough for the bleeding to stop, or I'll put a diathermy. If I'm using a chandelier, I use a bimanual. I use a passive back flush and diathermy active. So I do a lot of bimanual surgery because diabetics and otherwise, even for RD patients, I use a lot of bimanual surgery now. I find bimanual really helps a lot. And the one hand which is, kind of in disuse can becomes active. So built-in 532 endolaser is a big bone, but of course the costs shoot up like anything. And the cutter should be ergonomically designed and pneumatically driven, ideally, because there's no spring action. We get very high cut rates of 10,000 cuts. Maybe there's no end to having cut rates, but 10,000 works well. I use a 10,000 cut by Constellation and the Constellation cutter, and with linear cutting, I use it's very microsurgical, very lightweight, and it's got a stiffening sleeve for MIBS cutters, and I use this bimanual chandelier nearly in most of my cases, and of course macular surgery I don't. And this is self-fitting Chalam lens by KB Chalam, and so this stays on the macula for magnified viewing of the macula, because macular surgery you need magnifying viewing, and it's a 4-flange lens which doesn't slip off. And of course, for wide-angle viewing, I use the contact wide-angle viewing system, but you have the non-contact. One of the popular ones, the Resight, which fits onto the Zeiss microscope. So all our the instrumentation and the techniques, it's a closed vitrectomy system. We've all shifted to MIBS, the 23 and 25. For diabetics, I like to use 27 also. And I use the Ingenuity VR viewing system. It's a high magnification digitized system where your pixels actually join up together and help to increase the magnification like an analog microscope. So this is showing you a small movie of flaps. This is with the IOCT, with the device, which the IOCT device actually comes onto the screen. So you know the whole, it's a multi-layered flap, inverted flap, which has come on. So the residency training also gets greatly improved, because once you do this kind of a procedure, the residents also see exactly what you're doing, and even your complications they see, and you can discuss with them. So I often talk to them while I'm doing my surgery. And this is the ILM peeling which is being done. This is a photograph. The dyes have played a big role. Sorry. The dyes have played a big role. I think it just went on its own. That this is just showing you a technique of surgery where we go in biplanar. You go in tangentially and then go down vertically. So the biplanar incision makes you a self-sealing bone. So wound construction is very important in MIBS surgery. And the art of wound construction should be known by all the beginners and all the people who are introducing themselves to vitreous surgery. So this tells you about the IOCT, which just, maybe there or not, because the cost factors are immense. And you can peel the ILM. I use the pinch technique, and I use the ILM forceps from Alcon and guide the flaps. I like to use this inverted ILM flap for reasonably larger hoses. The MHI is more than less than 0.5. So I bring in flaps from all sides and make sure, and I don't peel too much till the periphery. Only if the holes are very large, I'll go till the arcade. And depending on the size of the hole, I'll put SF6 or C3F8. But usually the holes do close within the first 48 to 72 hours. And this is because I use the walled cannulas. I use a vented gas force with this vent, because once I inject gas, then the vent helps to bring out the air. So this is a recent surgery which we did. This is not exactly a macular surgery, but this is showing you the membranes are the taut posterior hyaloid, and the vascularized membranes are extending onto the macula. So I thought probably this cutter itself becomes a multifunction instrument. And thanks to the Japanese who bought in the 27 gauge, it becomes a big bone to do macular surgery in cases of diabetics, where the membranes are overlying the macula. And so you want to prevent any iatrogenic damage as well as minimize any complications. And so I find these 27 gauge cutters really move in very easily in the correct plane between the abnormal fibrovascular tissue and I like to segment all my tractional membranes, and I like to leave some islands behind. I don't try to make a cosmetic kind of a vitrectomy. So once the disc, all around the disc is cleared, it really helps. So I won't take long. This actually goes on and on. So first post-op day, vision was 6:36, and the second post-op day, this is the oil-filled same patient, 6:12. Thank you so much. Thank you, Malika.
Thank you, sir. Very good videos, wonderful videos. Any comments, Shobit? Dr.
Pretty
Mudit?
much the same technique.
Yes, sir.
Only
sorry,
thing I
I'm-
remember, Dr. Atul used to operate with the inverted image at one time using the contact lens.
I still don't use the SDI because I'm used to the indirect
That's something I find
colonoscopy.
very intriguing.
So I don't use the SDI. Shobit, I'm still not using the SDI.
Sir, how often do you use the IOCT in, let us say, a macular hole or an ERM?
Very good question. It's a very good question. I use it quite often for macular surgery. I
Even
find
for,
yeah, because because of myopic macular holes, sometimes you identify them. There's lack of contrast, and detachment surgery, which are myopics, we are getting a lot of myopic detachments. There you're not sure whether there's a macular hole. Sometimes you have to have a peripheral break. So once PFC is injected and the macula is flattened out, I use the IOCT to just make sure there's a hole or not. And often I do pick up holes, then I tackle them with the flaps. So I'm just telling you that submacular bleed, you don't want to inject TPA through a PED.
RP.
You want to inject it in the submacular space where there's only blood. So the submacular TP injection, as per what you talked in your lecture very nicely, it's important to have an IOCT, but I'm telling you it's an expensive proposition. Maybe we can do without it also. It's not that it has to be there.
Yeah.
It's just that it's an additional tool which may be there or may not be there. But I think one can do easily the same kind of surgery without it.
Yeah. Anything else, Dr. Lalit Verma?
I don't think he could.
Shall we go to Dr. Chawla's talks? One is on disc pit maculopathy and the other is on maculoschisis, myopic maculoschisis.
Are two cases of optic fit in which I'll show the mistakes I used to make earlier.
Methods of internal
So,
limiting
this is a young girl, a case of optic pit with macular schisis, and you see this. She had counting finger vision. This was the time when I was not doing foveal sparing fields. It was a routine, simple hyaloid removal. So my technique has always been to flap the pit with ILM, a nasal flap, and in my initial cases, I used to do this non-sparing peel, and I would do an extensive peel along with a flap onto the optic pit from the nasal flaps onto the optic pit, and leave the patient with 20% SF6, explaining to them that the visual improvement would be slow and gradual. So this is this patient, and she initially did well. The flap was in place, everything was good. And then 6 weeks post-op, she developed this break. And that was the turning point, because before this, I had not had a break despite non-fovea sparing peels. Then I changed my technique in the subsequent cases. Frankly, I do about 3 to 4 such cases a year, it's not more. So over the years, the series has built up, and now I'm doing this procedure. I've done about 4 to 5 cases with this technique, where this patient had a associated coloboma also. So what I do now is, besides doing my flap, just to safeguard the cystic macula, even if on settling down it tends to develop a hole, I flap it from before. So what I do is an envelope flap technique. First, I do my nasal flaps. Then I go ahead with this what I call as more of a fortifying the cystic fovea surgery. So I just put an envelope of flaps on top of the cystic fovea, do a temporal relaxation. So this is the technique which I follow now, and my experience has been fairly nice. And visual acuity here was 618.
Do you do any laser during surgery, temporal
So-
to the optic nerve head?
My second talk is on, we can discuss them both together,
Okay.
is on myopic macular traction maculopathy. And I think it's an important thing where myopes are undergoing cataract surgery. It's important to see what lurks beneath. This is one of my favorite slides where I compare juvenile schisis to myopic schisis and show that here the ILM is under traction, there it is not. So I like to basically simply classify it in my cases as simple, where there is one zone of schisis, or compound where there are multiple zones of schisis. So this is a 38-year-old female, diminution of vision in both eyes, 612 visual acuity in the left eye, early posterior subcapsular cataract, and myopic foveoschisis. In this OCT, we could identify the traction on ILM temporal to the fovea very well. The patient was explained about the possibility of surgery if the disease progresses. I did not want to operate at 612 vision at that stage, and she was a relatively young patient. Obviously, because I was not very encouraging at that stage, she also said she would also like to wait, and then she slipped to 636 vision, and she came with this picture. The traction had gone up. And we chose to do the surgery for her. Here also, I like to do foveal sparing surgery, a hyaloid removal. There is many times vitreoschisis present in these cases. And I again support my cystic fovea with a nice flap. And I pay particular attention to the cases, to the areas of traction. Like here on OCT, the temporal traction was very visible. It was also clinically visible on the table, and I went and did an extensive temporal peel, relaxing the temporal to the fovea retina. And this was our result. I use 10% C3F8 in these patients. I don't use a full 17%. And patient progressed well pre-op, and that's 1 week post-op. 618, 3 weeks post-op. Another case, 2120 vision. These are myopic eyes. And this was again the period I was not doing foveal sparing field. And this was an only-eyed patient. But he did well with a phaco, vitrectomy, ILM peel, and gas for myopic foveal schisis. Pre-op was counting finger, post-op was 2120. Later on, he went up to 2040. So good fundus ignition this is important for anterior segment surgeons in myopic, and be wary if the cataract and visual loss do not correlate. OC is a must today. There is variability of response to surgery. Combined surgery works better. History of recent progressive decrease in vision is a good prognostic marker. For me, peripheral retinal checkup is very important at conclusion in these eyes, and in the absence of macular hole, ILM peeling alone can give good results. I have done it with macular holes also because I don't do macular buckle. For anterior segment surgeon, it is important to rule out MMT before. Another patient, only eyed with severe traction, and this was the result. Visual improvement was partial, but 5 patients as he was seeing better. Thank you very much.
Excellent videos, Dr. Chawla.
Hello?
Yeah, excellent videos. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
One thing I noticed is that you don't seem to use laser temporal to the disc pit during the surgery.
I never use it.
You don't use, and you don't feel that that could cause recurrence of fluid. Dr. Atul Kumar, what is your policy on laser, sir, intraoperatively?
I don't laser. Actually, any type of peeling on the pit eye will lead to a hole formation, as Shobit said. And so I just do PVD induction and put a platelet-rich plasma drop over there on that pit. And it does work, but it takes time. It takes a few weeks and results may not be so encouraging, but the schisis, the multi-layered schisis goes down, flattens out, and the subretinal fluid also can go down.
So you don't do ILM peeling also in these patients?
Absolutely should not be done.
Okay.
It leads to hole formation.
So just a PVD and closing
PVD.
the pit with some...
Platelet-rich plasma or autologous serum is what is recommended. ILM peeling is now contraindicated.
I do a ILM peel on the papillomacular area and just cover it, and I have 45 or something. But I would love to try not touching the ILM at all and just doing a PVD. But these cases, if there is history of recent visual loss, the prognosis is much better than those cases which have been tried.
Shobit, in your cases, did you ever feel that because you didn't do a macular buckle, there was a failure in macular schisis and you would rather have somebody do the buckle?
Well, I have done about 14 eyes. I have never had a problem. I have had fairly good results. Yes, visual improvements have been variable, but I've never had, in fact, even where I have had a myopic macular rhegmatogenous RD with a macular hole, I have done this flap technique. Even in coloboma with a macular hole, I have done. And I found that the retina settles well and the hole closes. Somehow, I'm not very convinced. Maybe I have not done those very high
staphyloma cases. Okay. Mudit, you have access to macular buckle. I think Padmaja does it. So have you had to refer some cases for buckle if they failed vitrectomy in macular schisis?
So I have done a buckle, but to be honest, I have found the results with a vitrectomy and ILM peeling to be fairly good. There have been some cases which have failed initially, but if you go inside, do an extensive peeling and put gas again, in 2 of these cases, just by doing a repeat fluid gas exchange, the schisis settle down completely over a period of 2 to 3 months. So I have not had a problem with the vitrectomy. It has given fairly good results and outcomes in most of my cases. The only reason I did a buccal as a macular buccal was because I wanted to see whether it is helpful, and because I was getting good results with my vitrectomy, I never somehow made a transition to the macular buccal surgery as such.
Yeah, even I have never felt that it would have made a difference.
Yeah.
If the vision is poor, that's because of the RP defects and all, but structurally they do improve after the vitrectomy.
They do. And in case if you have done an extended peeling, even if there is still a persistent of schisis, like I said, doing a repeat fluid gas exchange in a lot of these cases leads to a complete resolution over a period of time.
Do you do laser temporal to the disc?
No, I don't. I used to do it earlier, but now I have stopped. Now I kind of do something similar to what Dr. Shobhit Chawla had shown. So like what Sir has done, even I take just a nasal ILM just around the papillomacular bundle and I stuff it over there. I try to kind of not do a peeling over the macular area, foveal area, but I do take a nasal peel and I put it over the macular hole. Like
Yeah,
what
plugging is important. Yeah.
I would like to just focus on 2 points. The first case which I showed of the optic pit which developed a hole. When she did not have the hole, she had recovered 624 vision from counting finger. When she had the hole, she stabilized at 636. And I did suggest her surgery, but at the same time, I told her that if you're happy with this improvement, and she said, yes, I am. And she has maintained 636. It's been 4 or 5 years now. And one more point I would like to ask Dr. Mudir, did he combine vitrectomy with his macular buccal, or it was just only a macular buccal?
No, in that case, it was only macular buccal, sir. But that was the only one case where I've done. Apart from that, I've always only done a vitrectomy with ILM peeling and a fluid gas exchange.
I find MMT cases do fairly well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If caught early and if they are under your follow-up and you have tracked the schisis progressing.
Yeah, I think in the camp of the vitrectomy for myopic macular textopathy, not the buccal group.
Yeah, that's right. Because all of us are very much trained in vitrectomy and ILM peeling, whereas macular buccal is a completely uncharted territory for all of us. And it looks very unsophisticated and also doesn't make sense, too much of sense.
Buccal slippage.
Yes.
That's what the Japanese say, and the Japanese don't like this macular buccal now.
Yeah.
Because they feel the buccal slips away from the macula.
I think only Dr. Carlos Matthew is a great proponent of it.
It's a pretty blind kind of procedure also. I mean,
well, not blind by the way they are doing it. They are doing it with an illuminator and
yeah,
the
transillumination.
light inside the buccal and
I think now amongst all of us over here, I think only Dr. Pradeep Venkatesh and not Pradeep Venkatesh. I think I'm
yeah, in Shankar Netralaya, there is a doctor. Yeah. I'm forgetting his name too, but he does a lot of buckles. Yeah.
He's the only one who has got an extensive.
Pradeep, his name is Pradeep Surkar or.
Yeah, Pradeep Surkar, not Pradeep Venkatesh, sir. Sir, to RPC.
Yeah. So if there are any other comments, otherwise maybe we can.
Pradeep Suswar.
Yeah,
Pradeep. Yes, Pradeep.
Yes, sir. Hello, sir.
Hi, how are you? Good evening.
Hi, do you have a session now, Dr. Pramod?
Yeah, 7 o'clock.
Oh, I thought we were the last session. Okay. So shall we
Avis
wind
is
up
not
then?
going to leave us.
Shall we wind up then if there are no more comments?
thank you, Dr. Malika. Thank you.
I would like to thank my esteemed co-instructors, Professor Atul Kumar, Professor Azad, Dr. Lalit Verma, Dr. Shobhit Chawla, and Dr. Mudit Tyagi. Thank you all for your time and your excellent investment and inputs. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Malika Goel, ma'am. Thanks, AIOS.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, sir. Thank you, everyone.